So I realized that this problem may still be confusing to people. So I wanted to record a video to go over this question again. So this is the monohybrid dihybrid slide from lecture involving pea plants. In this question, we're looking at the color and the shape of these peas. Okay, so in monohybrid cross, we're essentially looking at experimental cross involving true breeding parents that differ in one character. Okay, whereas in dihybrid, we're looking at that pattern of inheritance in two genes. Okay, so this side is going to show you monohybrid. This is, and then I have more pages to show you on dihybrid. Let's go over the monohybrid once again. So we've got true breeding parents crossed, and this you don't even need to do Punnett square. If you do, it will look something like this. Right, big Y, small y, small y. Without using this, you can think of it this way. Well, from this parent, the only possible gamete is big Y. The only other possible, the only possible gamete in this parent is small y. So the only possible phenotype or genotype in F1 generation is big Y, small y. Okay, that means all the F1 generation are going to turn out to be yellow. Okay, or have yellow peas. Now, in the second cross, we're crossing two F1 generation. Big Y, small y, big Y, small y. They're crossed. Okay, and using the Punnett square method, this is what we see. Okay, 1 to 2 to 1. So, and 3/4 of which are going to be yellow. Okay, and this one's going to be green. Now, without using the Punnett square method, okay, and once again, in this question, it's not hard to do Punnett square, but as we'll see in the later question, sometimes it may not always make sense to use the Punnett square method. So using the non-Punnett square method, okay, we look at, first of all, the possible gametes that can be generated in each parent. Well, this parent can either give the big Y or it can give the small y. So these are the possible genotypes. Okay, so for the offspring to get big Y, okay, we would need the offspring to get first a big Y from this parent and then a big Y from this parent. So that's 1/2 times 1/2. That's 1/4. Okay, and in the second genotype, well, we're looking at the probability of the offspring having one big Y and one small y. But it can be, taking big Y from this parent and then followed by small y in this parent. Or you can get small y from this parent and then big Y in this parent. Right. So with this, that's 1/2 times 1/2. With this, that's another 1/2 times 1/2. Okay, because this is a question involving OR, and these two events are mutually exclusive, meaning that they cannot both occur at the same time. And I'll go over mutually exclusive events again later. But in either case, you get half. Okay, if you check with the Punnett square, you see it should correspond to this, right? 1/2. I'm gonna cover this just to prevent it from being confusing, or you shouldn't use this to cheat. Okay, so now the last possible genotype is small y, small y. Okay. Then the chance of small y is 1/2. Well, to get small y, you need a small y from this parent and then another small y from this parent. So that means that's 1/2 times 1/2. That's 1/4. Now we're looking at this dihybrid cross now. Once again, we're studying the inheritance pattern of two separate genes. Okay, in this case, we're looking at the Y gene, which involves color, and then R gene that involves the shape of the P. Okay, we're crossing true breeding parents. One which is homozygous dominant in both genes, the other is homozygous recessive in both genes. And to get the F1, possible F1 genotype, well, you just look at, okay, what is the possible gametes that this parent can generate, right? When we're making gametes, remember that we're reducing copies of chromosomes from 2 copies to 1. Okay, that means one of these two is going to be chosen, one of these two is going to be chosen. Okay, so that means the only possible gametes that this parent can generate is big Y, big R. Okay, whereas the only possible gamete that this parent can generate is small r, small y, small r. Okay, and given that, the only possible genotype that F1 generation can be is big Y, big R, small r. Now, with the F1 cross, we're taking two F1 generations and crossing them. Okay, and this is the resulting Punnett square. But this can be, I think personally, it can be easy to mess up on. Okay, and so I actually have the non-Punnett square on a separate sheet of paper, so just ignore that. I'm gonna go over to this paper now. Okay, so still using this, we're gonna look at the non-Punnett square method of the stem cross. Okay, now there's different ways of approaching this case depending on the question you're asked. Okay, so here I'm using a question where you're asked to calculate a probability of F2 offspring being both green and round. Notice that green and round, these are independent events, meaning these two traits are carried on separate genes. So whether this gene is going to be inherited is a separate independent event from whether the pea plant will be round or the peas will be round. That's what I mean by independent. Okay, but they are not mutually exclusive. Okay, an example of mutually exclusive events would be being green and yellow. In this case, you can't be both green and yellow. Okay, so those two events will be considered mutually exclusive. But being green and round, these two events are not mutually exclusive, meaning that they can both occur at the same time in the same individual. Okay, so using the rule of multiplication, which we can apply to independent events that are not mutually exclusive, here's what happens. To calculate a probability of the peas being both green and round, okay, we'll just multiply the separate probabilities. That means we find out what is the probability that the peas in F2 will be green, and then multiply that by probability of that the offspring peas being round. Okay, and you can think of the rule of multiplication like this. Okay, so you're looking for someone to date and you want the person to be rich. Okay, that cuts it down to maybe like 10% of the population. But if you want the person to be rich and smart, okay, you become more and more pickier with or choosy with your criteria. The number shouldn't increase, right? It should actually decrease, right? So you're putting more and more stringent rules on the person you're trying to find. Then let's say there's 10% population. Let's just do down. Let's just say that there's 10% of the population that's rich, and then there's 10% population that's smart. To find someone who is rich and smart, that's 1 in 100. Okay. No, this is not a very good example, just because these two events aren't necessarily mutually. These events are not necessarily independent. Okay, one can influence another. Oftentimes, if you're smarter, you tend to also have a more successful career. I don't know, but anyway, that's beyond what I was trying to say. Sorry, I'm getting distracted right now. Okay, but if you were to instead add them, right, and you get 2 out of 10, that's 1/5. It wouldn't make sense, because if you're saying I want someone who's rich and someone who's smart, right, you shouldn't get a larger percentage of the population. Okay. Now, going back to this question. Where was I? So now we can calculate these two probabilities separately. Well, the probability of the P being green, the only possible genotype is small y, small y. Okay. If you want to do the Punnett square here, you can, and the Punnett square will be simpler looking, because we're just looking at one gene now. We're looking at, okay, what is the possibility that this cross would result in small y, small y? That means you get small y from this parent, that's 1/2 the chance. Small y from this parent, that's 1/2. So you multiply the two and get 1/4. Meaning, in the F2 generation, the possibility of yielding an offspring that is green is 1/4. Now, slightly more complicated for calculating the probability of the offspring being round. Okay, to be round, knowing that the round trait is dominant, or the round allele is dominant, so that means we're looking at the probability of the genotype being either big R, or big R, small r. These two events are mutually exclusive events, meaning that your genotype cannot be both big R, and big R, small r. You either have this or this, right? You can either be this or this. Okay? And so we, in this case, we can apply the rule of addition. So we add the two together. Okay. If you want to draw a little Punnett square, simpler Punnett square, since we're looking at each gene by itself right now, here we're looking at the color gene, here we're looking at the shape gene, right? Instead of drawing the 4x4 Punnett square, we can draw a 2x2, right? We're looking at, based on this cross, big R, small r, big R, small r. What is the chance that the offspring will be big R, big R? Well, that's this one right here, right? Okay. And then here we're looking at what's the percentage, or what's the probability of the offspring being big R, small r. Or it can be either this one or this one. After you've done enough of these questions, you don't even have to draw this out to know that this will be 1/2. Okay, because it can be big R, small r followed by, it can be big R followed by small r, or small r followed by big R, right? So that's 1/2. Now, because this is a question about two mutually exclusive events, okay, then in that case we apply the rule of addition and we add those together, and we get that the probability of the F2 offspring being round is going to be 3/4. Now, back to calculating probability of the offspring being green and round. Where do you figure out the probability of the offspring being green? And then we just multiply that to the probability of the offspring being round, and we should get 3/16. Okay, if you look at that table in your slides, okay, and okay, that corresponds to this one, and this one. Okay, that's 3 of the 16. Okay. This is part 3 of the video. In this part of the video, I'm going to go over a separate question related to the problem we were just looking at, we're once again looking at the F2 generation. That's a result of F1 crossing big Y, small y, big R, small r, crossed with big Y, big R, small r. Okay, and here the question is, what is the phenotypic distribution that we would expect in the F2 generation? Well, first we have to figure out, well, what are the possible phenotype combinations in the F2 generation? Well, if you look at the possible, well, since we're looking at two traits, right? For the first trait, which is the P color, it could either be green or yellow. For shape, it can either be round or wrinkled. Okay, so that means the F2 generation's phenotype could be green and round, or it could be green and wrinkled, or it can be yellow and round, or yellow and wrinkled. Okay, so these are the possible phenotypes in the F2 generation. Notice that these two events are independent events. Okay, so in order for us to calculate the probability of the F2 generation being green and wrinkled, we simply calculated the probability of F2 generation being green first, and then multiplied that by the probability that will be wrinkled. Okay, and that's true for each of these cases. Okay, in this part, we're looking at first the probability of the F2 being yellow and round. So it's the rule of multiplication. To be yellow, it needs to have at least one big Y. Okay, once again, you can do the little cheat Punnett square. And given this parental cross, we know that the probability of getting at least one big Y, that's these three, right? 3/4. Okay. And it's the same here with round. Okay, but after you've done enough practice, you don't even need to draw this out. You can just look at this and you realize that that's 3/4. Okay. And same with the shape gene. Okay, for the offspring to be round, it needs at least one big R. Okay, so that's 3/4. 3/4 times 3/4, that's 9/16. Okay, you look at this Punnett square table. Okay, 9/16. Well, that corresponds to this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Sorry, not this one. This one, this one, this one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wait a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9. Okay. I can't see this table clearly, but it seems easy enough to count the Punnett square, but realize that, on the test you will be drawing your own Punnett square. Okay. And then you have to go over and figure out which ones are yellow and round. Okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay. And then now when we look at the second possible phenotype, yellow and wrinkled. Well, to be yellow, you just need at least one big Y. So that's 3/4. For offspring to be wrinkled, you need two small r's, since wrinkle is the recessive trait. Okay, so that's using the small cheating Punnett square. That's big Y, sorry, big R, small r, big R, small r. Because we're isolating the gene and just looking at this right now. Crossing two such parents, the possibility of getting two small r is going to be this one. Okay. Or without, after you've done enough practice, you don't even need to do this. You just look at the cross and you said, okay, in order for us to get one small r from this parent, that's 1/2 of a chance. In order to get this other small r from this other parent, that's 1/2. So 1/2 times 1/2, that's 1/4. Okay, in either case, you multiply the two together, you get 3/16. Okay, now going back to this table, okay, we can verify that for the P to be both yellow and wrinkled, okay, that's this one, this one, okay, well, and this one. Okay, so that's 3/16. And then you do the same thing with P being green and round. Okay. Being green, you need 2 small lines, so that's 1/4. To be round, you need just at least 1 big R. Okay, that's going to be 3/4, and that gets 3/16. Finally, calculate the probability of the P being both green and wrinkled. You should get 1/16. Okay, and that's going to correspond to this one. I would say that if the question asks you to determine the phenotypic distribution, sure, you can go ahead and draw out this table if that is easier for you. But I would say if the question asks you to just determine what's the probability of the P in F2 being green and round, right? Instead of drawing out this whole thing, just go by this non-Punnett square method. It may be faster. Okay. You can pick either option. It's just nice to know both methods so you can verify your answer.